When my mother saw my face at the door, she looked surprised. Not happy, not proud. Just surprised, like she'd forgotten I was invited. She blinked once, forced a smile, and said, "Oh, you made it." That was all. No hug. No, "How was your flight?" No, "I'm so glad you're here." Just those 4 words. Then she turned back toward the kitchen. I stood there, holding a gift I'd spent 3 weeks planning. A hand-framed painting, the place where Heather got engaged. It was soft and warm, with gold leaf edging and a little brass plaque underneath that read, "The beginning of forever." I thought she might cry when she saw it. She didn't. She opened it at the gift table while sipping her drink and barely looked at the artwork. "Oh, wow," she said. "So thoughtful." She passed it to someone behind her without even reading the plaque. The box I wrapped it in was still in her hands. She held it like trash she didn't know where to put. My name is Marin. I'm 31. I was the invisible daughter in a family that only noticed what sparkled. My sisters knew how to charm a room. My cousins got good at showing off. I got good at leaving early and not making a sound. I came from Seattle for this, took unpaid leave from work, rented a car, paid for my own hotel room, because my mom said the house was too full already. I even called ahead to offer help with planning. She told me everything was handled. I arrived that morning early. Too early, probably. I stood in the doorway while she arranged cheese boards with Heather and my aunt. I offered to help. She looked at the table, then at me. "Maybe just stay out of the way," she said. So I did. I stood outside, next to the rented heaters and half-empty drink buckets. The sun was already down. The fairy lights flickered like they were tired too. At some point, I found a spot at a plastic table near the corner of the tent. They kept calling it the overflow table. Me, a couple of teenagers, a great aunt with a hearing aid that didn't work, and someone's +1 who didn't speak the language. I sat there with my purse on my lap, watching people twirl around each other like movie extras in a scene that didn't need me. My mother walked past a few times. Once she paused. She glanced at me and said, "You wore that." It wasn't a question, it was a statement, judgment, baked into a whisper. I had worn navy, a structured dress, not flashy, not boring, just appropriate, apparently not enough. She walked away before I could respond. I didn't follow. Instead, I helped the bartender pack up, quietly covered the cost of the wine upgrade they'd added last minute. My mom said money had been tight this year, so I told the venue manager to charge the difference to my card. She never noticed. Later, I heard her laughing near the dessert table. She was telling someone how Heather was the one who always brought the family together. I looked around. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. No one asked why I was alone. When the music started, I watched people dance barefoot in the grass like it was a real-life movie. I slipped away during the second round of champagne toasts. No coat, no announcement, no goodbye. I walked down the street with my heels in my hand and my phone off. Called a ride, sat on the curb. The driver didn't speak to me, and I was grateful for that. At the hotel, I didn't turn on the lights, just stood in the dark with the mini fridge humming and the dull ache in my temples growing louder. My phone had no notifications, no missed calls, no one wondering where I'd gone. I sat on the edge of the bed with one shoe still on and realized something. I could vanish completely, and no one would notice until they needed something. I laid back and stared at the ceiling until the room felt smaller than it was. The next morning, I checked out early, left the extra keycard at the desk, took the shuttle to the airport, didn't text anyone. The flight was delayed twice. I sat at the gate, watching families reunite, kids cry, couples argue. I didn't speak for 6 hours. When the plane finally boarded, I watched the city disappear under the clouds without any sense of missing it. Back in Seattle, I walked to my apartment alone. I didn't post pictures from the trip, didn't send a thank you message, didn't reply to the one photo my aunt tagged me in. I wasn't smiling in it anyway. By the time Monday came, it was like the whole weekend had been a dream. Or a test, and I'd finally passed, because for once, I didn't try to fix it, didn't explain, Didn't cry in the bathroom like I used to when I was 17, and my mom rolled her eyes at my shoes. I didn't ask for love, didn't beg for approval, didn't apologize for being quiet. I just left, not out of anger, out of certainty that this wasn't a place I needed to keep returning to, that whatever they thought I lacked, sparkle, charm, usefulness, I didn't owe it to them to prove otherwise. I made dinner that night alone, a salad and some lentils. I opened a book I'd been meaning to read for months. I listened to the silence in my apartment and realized I wasn't lonely. I was finally alone in a way that felt safe. I didn't slam the door, I didn't say goodbye, I just left, and no one came after me. The first thing I did was delete her number, then my sisters, then my aunts, my cousins, my stepfathers, one by one. Not in anger, not as revenge, just like cutting dead branches. You don't cry over pruning, you just do it so something else can grow. I cleaned out my phone, then my inbox, then my closet. There were 3 dresses I only wore to family events. I donated them the next morning. I took the gold bracelet my mother gave me at 16 and dropped it in the donation bin too. I never liked how it felt on my wrist. Everything from my old life was soft-edged and guilt-lined. Photos, cards, half-finished letters I used to write her when I still thought one day she'd see me. I tossed them out. Let the trash collectors take what I couldn't carry anymore. After the engagement party, I stopped calling, stopped checking birthdays, stopped wondering if they missed me. They didn't. No one reached out. No one asked where I'd gone. There were no voicemails, no emails, no awkward apologies wrapped in birthday memes. Silence. And in that silence, I started breathing again. I picked up extra shifts. I worked 2 jobs, then 3. Barista in the mornings, retail in the afternoons, freelance at night. At first, it was about survival. Then it became something else, control. I liked knowing that if I failed, it was mine. And if I succeeded, it would be mine too. There was no one to impress, no one to disappoint, no one watching, which meant I could become anything. I took online classes, quietly, business management, UX design, digital marketing. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post certificates, didn't share updates. My wins were mine, private, sacred. When I started my online shop, I didn't even put my name on it. I called it Ash and Wool. Software anonymous, clean. I sold handmade pieces, article prints, objects that made people feel something. By the end of the first year, I was making more than all 3 of my jobs combined. So I quit them. No goodbye parties, no farewell gifts. Just a quiet exit, the same way I left my family. I moved apartments, nothing fancy, just clean walls, soft rugs, no pictures of people who forgot me. The neighbors didn't know my name. I liked it that way. There were days I didn't speak at all. Mornings I spent with tea and silence and soft light through my windows. I bought myself a better phone, then a laptop, then a camera. I reinvested everything in me. My mom didn't know I ran a business. My sister didn't know I'd paid off my student loans. My family still thought I was struggling, still living small, still invisible. That was fine. Let them think that. Let them think I still needed them. I was learning what it meant to be whole without witnesses, what it felt like to build something without applause. It's strange how silence can hurt you until it heals you. At first, I kept expecting something, a text, a call, a holiday card with "We miss you" written in someone else's handwriting, but nothing ever came. So I stopped expecting. The less I expected, the more I got done. There were no more detours into guilt, no more late-night spirals about what I did wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just born too quiet for people who only loved noise. So I made a home inside that quiet. I filled it with books, good light, soft music no one else had to hear. I made tea at exactly 7:15 a.m. every day. I kept a journal where I never mentioned their names. I wrote about what I was building, not what I'd lost. I was no longer the person they once dismissed, but I wasn't out for revenge, not yet. There's something that happens when you give yourself permission to disappear. The fear fades. You realize you don't need to be seen to matter. You don't need to be praised to be real. You become someone else, someone freer, someone lighter, someone who doesn't owe anyone anything. One winter night, I got an email. No subject line, just my mom's name in the sender field. I stared at it for a long time, didn't open it, just deleted it. I blocked her email, then her backup email, then the one she used for old chain letters and political rants. I didn't read what she wrote, because if it had mattered, she would have written it years ago. Instead, she sent it into the dark and hoped I'd still be the kind of daughter who came running when she called. I wasn't. I changed my number the next day, let go of the old one like a coat that no longer fit. If someone really needed me, they'd find another way, but no one did. That spring, my business hit 6 figures. I took a photo of my dashboard, smiled, deleted it. I didn't need proof. The proof was in the quiet mornings, the freedom, the calm. I used to chase their love like oxygen. Now I didn't even think about them when I breathed. When I saw my cousin's wedding photos online, I didn't feel anything. I clicked through them like I was looking at strangers. They all looked the same, tight smiles, matching dresses, eyes that didn't see me when I stood in front of them. They hadn't changed, but I had. There was no revenge in my silence, only peace, only proof that I'd been the strong one all along. They just didn't know it, because I never raised my voice to prove it. The call came on a Thursday. I didn't answer it. It rang twice, then stopped. Voicemail, I let it sit there. 2 hours later, I listened. It was my aunt's voice, flat, formal, like reading a script she didn't believe in. She said my mother had been admitted to the hospital, chest pain, tests, unclear what was happening. She said the family was gathering, that it would mean a lot if I came. I sat there, holding my phone like it was something I didn't want to touch. I hadn't heard her voice in 5 years. It hadn't aged. It still sounded like it was used to being obeyed. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just stared at the wall until the light outside shifted. Then I booked a flight. Not because they asked, not because I forgave anything, but because I wanted to see what happened when a ghost walks into a room full of people who forgot she ever lived there. At the airport, I wore black. Not mourning, just neutral. Forgettable. I walked through baggage claim with a carry-on and no emotion. No one was waiting for me. They didn't know I was coming. At the hospital, I asked for her room number at the front desk. The nurse gave me a look. One of those too sweet smiles people give to women who look like they don't belong here. I nodded, took the elevator, walked down the hall past rooms with flowers and balloons and get well posters scribbled by children. My mother's room was quiet, no laughter, no visitors, just the sound of the monitor ticking off her pulse. She was asleep when I walked in. Her hair was thinner than I remembered. Her hands looked small without her rings. I stood at the edge of the bed. She didn't stir. There was a framed picture on the windowsill. Heather and my mom at her wedding, cheeks pressed together like sisters. I wasn't in any of the frames, not even the background. I sat in the chair across from her bed and watched her sleep for almost an hour. At one point, she stirred. She didn't open her eyes. She just said, "Heather?" And I said nothing, just stood up, walked out, didn't look back. In the hallway, I passed my sister. She froze, blinking like I was a memory she'd suppressed too long. "Maureen?" she said. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. I nodded once. She hugged me too hard, too fast, like we'd ever been close. I didn't hug back. She stepped away awkwardly. "You look so different." I didn't answer. She started talking fast, filling the space with updates and excuses. How things had been hard. How Mom wasn't herself lately. How no one knew how to reach me. I let her talk, let her fill the hallway with words that didn't reach me. Eventually, she asked, "Can you help with the hospital bill? I mean, you're doing well, right?" There it was, the real reason. Not reunion, not regret, just need. I looked at her, at the worry hiding behind her eyes, the fear that I might say no. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just said, "She's not my responsibility." Then I walked past her, out the front doors, into the cold air that felt more honest than any room I'd left behind. I stayed in a hotel near the edge of town, paid cash, didn't tell anyone where. No visits, no updates, no social media. They called. A lot. At first, I didn't answer. Then I did, just once. A family meeting. That's what they called it. It wasn't a meeting. It was begging with nicer lighting. They gathered in the old house, everyone older, but not wiser. They smiled like we were at a reunion. I didn't smile back. They offered me tea. I declined. My cousin asked what I'd been doing. I said, living, nothing more. They all looked around at each other, like someone should know what that meant. My aunt started talking about my mom's will. There had been changes, apparently. Things were uncertain. They needed my input. They needed my help. They needed me. It was strange, hearing that word in their mouths after so long. Need, like I'd ever been enough to need before. They talked in circles. Money, assets, the house, the hospital. I didn't say much, just listened. Watched them squirm in the silence I didn't bother filling. When they asked if I could contribute, I said, to what? And no one had an answer that didn't sound like shame. I went to the kitchen, opened a drawer. The silverware was still organized the way I did it in high school. I smiled, once, left the drawer open, then I walked out. The next day, I went back to the hospital, alone. My mother was awake this time. When she saw me, she froze, then softened, then reached for my hand. I didn't move. She said my name, like it hurt. I didn't respond. She said, I'm glad you came. And I said, I didn't come for you. She closed her mouth, let her hand fall. I stood there a few minutes longer. Then I left without saying goodbye. I walked back to the hotel, made a cup of tea, booked a flight home. I left them all behind, sitting in rooms full of questions I'd never answer. They thought I'd come back to make peace, but I didn't come back for peace. I came back to see if they'd changed. They hadn't. I wasn't angry. I just wasn't theirs anymore. I didn't answer when they called again. The messages piled up, texts with half-truths and full expectations. She's not doing well. Things are getting complicated. Please, we really need to talk. I didn't respond. I flew home, opened the windows, let the light in. I lit a candle and sat in silence, the kind of silence that feels earned. A week passed, then a letter arrived, from a lawyer. My mother had changed her will, months before the hospital. My name was back in it, not just back. She'd made me executor. The family wasn't happy. They contested it immediately, said I wasn't close enough, said I didn't care, said I'd manipulated her. The lawyer asked if I wanted to dispute it. I said no, let them fight it. I had no interest in the scraps, but I read every page because I wanted to know what she thought I was worth. It wasn't the money. It was the lines between the money. What she gave to Heather, to my aunt, my cousin, my uncle, even after everything. She gave them more. I smiled at that. It confirmed something I already knew. They never saw me as blood, just utility. A quiet hand when something broke. A backup. A spare. So I gave them exactly that. Nothing. I signed away my share, donated it to an educational fund, in my mother's name, but not for family, for girls who aged out of foster care, for girls who were told they were too quiet to matter, for girls like me, before I knew better. The press release went out 2 weeks later, my mother's name, my name, a photo of me standing next to a giant check, wearing all black, expressionless. They saw it. I know they did. My cousin texted 3 times. Why didn't you say anything? Is that real? You gave it away? I didn't reply. She posted a cryptic story online, something about betrayal in the family. I watched it on mute, then blocked her, again, for good. They started reaching out to people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, former coworkers, an ex I hadn't seen in forever. All with the same question. What happened to Marin? No one had an answer. I liked it that way. One day my brother messaged me. We hadn't spoken in 6 years. His message was polite, almost careful. He said he was trying to buy a house, said the down payment was just out of reach. He'd heard I'd done well, said he'd pay me back. I read it once, then again. Then I archived it, didn't delete it, didn't respond, just let it sit there. A quiet no with no punctuation. A few days later, I got an email from the foundation. A girl had written a thank you letter, said she was going to be the first in her family to graduate, said my donation meant she didn't have to choose between rent and books. I read that one 3 times, then printed it, framed it, put it on the wall. The only thing I've ever framed. They still call sometimes, not often, just enough to remind me they haven't changed. I don't answer. I don't block them anymore, either. I want them to wonder why the line's open but silent. That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be cruel. It just has to be permanent. I never raised my voice, never slammed a door, never threw anything. I just stopped giving, stopped explaining, stopped being theirs. The last time I saw my mother, she was asleep. Now she's buried. I didn't go to the funeral, didn't send flowers, didn't send a note. Heather posted a photo. Black dress, red lipstick, fake tears. Goodbye to the strongest woman I've ever known. I didn't like the post, didn't comment, just read it once and closed the app. There's a house now, left to my mother's brother, the one who always called me the weird one. He wants to sell it. I bought it, cash. He didn't know it was me. Used a holding company. I let the listing sit for weeks, then made the offer at 10% over asking. He took it immediately. I changed nothing about the house, no renovations, no upgrades. I just let it sit. Empty, cold, quiet, like me. Once a year, I drive by it, just to see the weeds grow. I like watching nature reclaim it. Things fade when no one loves them properly. I learned that from her. There's a cousin no one talks to anymore, Rachel. She used to sit with me at family dinners when no one else would. Used to whisper jokes under the table. She was the first to leave the family, said they were poison. She was right. She lives in a small apartment now. Teaches music to kids who've never held a violin. I send her money every month. She doesn't know it's me. I never sign the checks, just leave a note. For the ones who saw me. They thought I was still the quiet girl, the one who cried in bathrooms, the one who held coats and took photos and never made the frame. Let them think that. Let them hold on to the memory while I walk past them for the last time. If you've ever felt like the outcast, the one they forgot, the one they used, and you found your way back to yourself, share this. Thank you for staying.